I'll be honest with you. For 2 years, maybe three, I believe Mickey Mantle was a newspaper name. A pretty story, a kid from the Oklahoma mines who looked good in pinstripes and hit the ball hard enough to make sports writers reach for their thesauruses. I thought New York had manufactured him the way New York manufactures everything loud, bright, and slightly unreal. I was wrong. I don't say that easily. I have said it maybe a dozen times in my entire life, but the truth doesn't ask your permission. It just stands there until you stop looking away. His father named him Mickey after Mickey Cochran. Think about that for a moment. Mutt Mantle, a man who worked the lead mines in Commerce, Oklahoma, whose hands were probably never fully clean, who probably never owned a suit that fit him properly. That man sat down somewhere and decided his son would carry the name of a Hall of Fame catcher. Not because it was practical, because he believed in something he couldn't fully articulate. That is not a small thing. That is a man placing a bet with the only currency he had. I grew up in San Diego, different kind of American story, but I understood fathers with expectations that had no ceiling. Mine left. Mutt Mantle stayed, and that staying carved something into Mickey that you could see if you knew what to look for. The first time I saw him in a clubhouse, I think it was 1952, maybe early 53, he had mud on his cleats that he hadn't bothered to clean. Not because he was careless, because he'd been on the field since before anyone else arrived. There was something in the way he looked at the diamond through the tunnel opening. Not excitement, not nerves, something quieter than both of those, like a man checking on something that belonged to him. I'd seen that look once before in a mirror the morning of my first at bat at Fenway. You don't forget a look like that when you see it on someone else. Commerce, Oklahoma to Yankee Stadium is not a distance you measure in miles. The 1,956 All-Star Game, Washington, Griffith Stadium, mid-morning batting practice, and the stands were mostly empty, a few groundskeepers, some photographers who hadn't found their angles yet, a handful of players leaning against the dugout rail with coffee they weren't really drinking. Mickey stepped into the box and I stopped what I was doing. I want to be precise here because precision matters to me. It always has. I have studied the mechanics of hitting the way a watchmaker studies gears. I can tell you the exact degree of hip rotation that separates a 280 hitter from a 320 hitter. I have broken down every swing worth breaking down. So when I tell you what I saw that morning, understand I am not speaking in poetry. His hands were impossibly quiet at the load. Most power hitters, even great ones, there is a moment of urgency in the hands, a microtension where the body betrays its intention just slightly too early. Mickey had none of that. The bat sat back like it was resting. And this is the part I've tried to explain to people who weren't there, the explosion wasn't violent. It was complete, the kind of completion you see in things that have been done 10,000 times until they stop being actions and become simply what the body does. The ball left the park, and Mickey didn't watch it. That's what I remember most. He didn't track it the way hitters track balls they're proud of. He was already resetting hands, dropping, eyes already recalibrating like the home run was a completed calculation, not an event. He nodded once, slightly, to no one, like he was confirming something to himself in a language no one else was authorized to hear. I looked over at a photographer next to me. He was adjusting his lens. He had missed it entirely. The newspapers in 1951 were not kind to him. Not the way you'd expect them to be. Unkind, not dismissive, not cold. Worse than that, they compared him to DiMaggio constantly. Every column inch, every radio call, every conversation in every barbershop in New York, can he be the next DiMaggio? As if that were the only question worth asking. as if Mickey Mantle's purpose was to be a sequel. Joe DiMaggio is a great man. I will not say otherwise, but Mickey Mantle was not a continuation of anything. He was a beginning. And the city of New York, the city that was supposed to be his, spent 3 years booing him for not being someone else. I heard the Yankee Stadium crowd turn on him once. A bad day at the plate, an error he compounded mentally, the kind of game where everything compounds. And they booed their own player in their own park. I was listening on the radio and I remember the sound of it, not hostile exactly, but disappointed in that particular New York way that is somehow colder than hostility. What I did not hear, and what I looked for when I saw him next, was any sign that it had touched him where it mattered. That is not numbness. Numb men flinch at small things. Mickey didn't flinch at anything. He simply knew something the crowd did not know. What the crowd thinks of you today is not the record. The record is kept elsewhere. People have asked me over the years why I understood Mickey when others didn't. Sports writers mostly. They frame it as a compliment. You always seem to see something in him early, Ted. But what they're really asking is whether I had some special gift for prophecy. I didn't. I had something less romantic and more useful than that. I had experience with a specific kind of pain, and I recognized it the moment I saw it wearing someone else's face. When I came up to the Red Sox in 1939, Babe Ruth had been retired for 4 years. 4 years is nothing. The man's shadow was still so long it covered every left-handed hitter in the American League like a permanent weather system. Every long ball I hit, some columnist measured it against a ghost. Every season I finished, the question wasn't what I had done, it was how far short I had fallen from something I had never agreed to chase in the first place. I did not sign a contract to become Babe Ruth. I signed a contract to become Ted Williams. But nobody asked me about that distinction for the first decade of my career. Mickey arrived in New York in 1951 and DiMaggio was still in the building. Literally still in the building, still in the outfield, still in the lineup, still casting the longest shadow in the American League. And when DiMaggio retired after that season, the shadow didn't leave with him, it just transferred. The New York newspapers handed it directly to Mickey like a piece of luggage he hadn't packed and couldn't put down. Can he be the next DiMaggio? That question followed him from spring training to October for 3 consecutive years. I know exactly what that question feels like from the inside. It feels like being asked to run a race whose finish line keeps moving toward a destination that belongs to someone else. What I watched Mickey do with that weight, and this is the thing I could only see because I had carried my own version of it, was refuse it. Not loudly, not with quotes to the press or visible defiance. Quietly. The way he refused something by simply not picking it up, he went to work on the things he could control, the swing, the approach, the preparation, and he let the comparison exist somewhere outside him, like whether he had noted and then stopped consulting. That is not a young man's instinct. That is a learned discipline, and learning it costs something real. Most players never learn it at all. They spend entire careers either crumbling under the comparison or exhausting themselves fighting it. Mickey had arrived at the third option, the one that requires you to know with absolute certainty that you are playing a different game than the one the newspapers are covering. I recognized that certainty because I had spent years building my own. The interior room with no door, the place where the noise stops being relevant. You do not find that room by accident. You build it brick by brick, out of every bad column and every unfair comparison and every season where you were measured against a standard you never set for yourself. Mickey Mantle built that room in Commerce, Oklahoma, before he ever saw Yankee Stadium. Mutt Mantle probably handed him the first brick. That is why I saw what I saw. Not prophecy, not genius, just the recognition that passes between two men who have survived the same particular thing without ever having to name it out loud. After the 1956 season ended, the Triple Crown season, 353, 52 home runs, 130 RBIs, the numbers that should have closed every argument that had ever been opened about Mickey Mantle. I saw him in a corridor somewhere between the field and the world. I don't remember the city. Some banquet, some end of season function where ball players stood around in suits that didn't quite fit and said things they were expected to say. I remember the conversation with a precision I reserve for very few things. I expected acknowledgement seeking. I'll say that plainly because I believe in saying things plainly. After a season like that, a triple crown, which hadn't been done in the American League since myself in 1947, which meant Mickey had just done something only a handful of men in the history of the game had ever done. I expected him to want confirmation, not arrogantly, just humanly. That's what men do when they've climbed something almost no one else has climbed. They look around for someone who understands the altitude. He didn't do that. Instead, he waited until the room thinned a little, until there was a quiet pocket near the back where two people could talk without becoming a photograph, and he asked me about bunting. Specifically, and I remember this exactly, he wanted to know how I processed a bunt decision against a left-handed pitcher who was working the outside corner with a late-breaking slider. Not a fastball pitcher, not a generic situation, a very specific pitcher, a very specific pitch, a very specific problem he had encountered that season and had not yet resolved to his own satisfaction. I stood there for a moment before I answered, not because I didn't know the answer, because I was recalibrating. Here's what that question told me about Mickey Mantle. It told me that somewhere inside a season that the rest of the world was already bronzing and putting on a shelf, he was still working, still finding the unsolved problem, still treating the Triple Crown not as a destination but as a point on a longer road that he hadn't finished walking. Most men, after a season like that, close the book. They've earned the right. Mickey was already on the next chapter, looking for the sentence that didn't read right. We talked for maybe 10 minutes. I gave him everything I had on the subject: hip positioning, timing the pitcher's front shoulder, the mental reset required when you shift from power hitting mode to contact execution. He listened the way I wish more young players had listened to me over the years. No performance of attention, no nodding at the wrong moments, just stillness and storage and the occasional question that proved he'd heard every word precisely. Then he said, "Thank you," not effusively, one clean sentence. And he walked back into the room and became Mickey Mantle again, the one everyone else could see. I stayed where I was for a moment longer than I needed to, thinking about what it costs a man to be that hungry after already having everything the season could give him. Thinking about Commerce, Oklahoma, and a father who named his son after a legend, not because he was dreaming, but because he already knew. That was the proof I hadn't needed by then, but it was the proof I've carried longest. Game 7, 1956 World Series. Yankees over the Dodgers. Mickey had played the entire series at a level that made you recalibrate what the word level meant. The defense in center field alone would have been enough, but it was the at-bats I kept returning to. The consistency of the approach. The way pressure, which compresses most men, seemed to expand him. I didn't watch it in a stadium. I listened to parts of it, caught the rest in summaries and film footage later. And when it was over, when the world was finally agreeing on what I had understood since that morning in Griffith Stadium, I didn't feel vindicated. That's the wrong word, and I refused to use it. What I felt was something closer to relief. Not for myself, for the record, because the record now reflected reality, and for a while there it hadn't. The crowd that had booed him was now claiming ownership of him, the way crowds always claim ownership of what they once rejected. That's not cynicism. That's just the long view. Mickey Mantle didn't need the revision, but the history books did. And somewhere, I suspect, Mutt Mantle, who placed that bet in Commerce, Oklahoma, with nothing but a name and a belief, had been right all along. There is a version of this story that ends with statistics. The Triple Crown, the 7 World Series rings, the 536 home runs hit on 2 legs that were never fully healthy, which means the number we have is not the number that was possible. And that gap, that invisible gap between what he did and what he could have done, is itself a kind of testimony, but I don't want to end there. What I want to say, what I've been trying to say this whole time, is that greatness at its truest is not a performance. Mickey Mantle was not performing for Yankee Stadium. He was not performing for the sports writers, or for DiMaggio's legacy, or for the contract, or for the Hall of Fame plaque he would eventually receive. He was doing what he had been doing since Commerce, Oklahoma, since Mutt Mantle looked at a boy and saw something worth naming after a legend. He was simply completing the calculation. Ball, swing, 90 feet, repeat,